Welcome back. It's good to see you. And today we're going to talk about the ego, my experience with the ego, and what I have to say about it. So, my experience with the ego has been an interesting one. Everybody has an ego, and when you go on your spiritual journey, on a spiritual path of some sort, you come across what is called the ego. And before we proceed forward, I just want to define what the ego is. A lot of spiritual leaders, spiritual people, they'll basically give you the rundown that the ego is pretty much your 3D avatar, and it's not necessarily who you are inherently. Basically, if you were playing a video game, right? Well, the character that you're playing as, that character is your ego, but you, the player, the one holding the controller, you are your truest self. And just use that example with our bodies, our material identity. For instance, my name is John Smith and I'm a banker at whatever, right? That is a part of the ego. That is an identity that is me, but it's not me at the same time. I know that sounds contradictory, but hear me out. When I say it's not me, but it is me at the same time, here's what I mean. Let me try to give an allegorical example, right? So imagine that you're wearing a permanent pair of pants. You can't take it off. It was with you when you were born, and it's going to be with you when you pass away. So, but the pants isn't really who you are. It's just a part of you in an extended way, not who you are at the absolute core of your being. Does that make sense? And with the ego defined, I want to go towards my experience with realizing the ego. Well, after some meditation, after trying numerous things to send my intent out to the universe, it's kind of funny to say that. We'll cover what that means in a future video. But essentially, after experimentation, doing some spiritual stuff, practicing mindfulness, exercising forgiveness, and just trying to overall be a more positive person. That's a very big aspect of spirituality. And I'm just trying to really get involved with it, really have my mindset be revolving around positivity, being open to the idea of oneness, even though I may not experience that. I just want to put myself in a frame of mind to try to better understand it. And the more that I did that, the more that I realized that there is a part of me that really enjoys being positive and kind of associating everything as one, from one source, as many would say. That all these trees in the background are connected to me and I'm connected to them. That the people in the city are connected to me just like how I'm connected to them, and they're connected to the trees like how the trees are connected to them, and so on and so forth. And of course, we'll get into this at a future video, but we're just talking about ego right now, of course. And by implementing these seemingly spiritual mindful practices, I started to slowly come to a self-realization that there is essentially two parts of me. There is the part of me that likes to be exalted. I like to be celebrated. I like to receive gifts. I like nice material things. I like dressing nice. I like looking good. I like being applauded. And that there's another side of me that doesn't really care about that. There's a part of me that doesn't care about wealth. I don't care about social standings. I don't care where my stance is in society, because simply there's more to life than having an identity, having an avatar in the system. And ultimately, that clashed with my life big time. And I started to have this inner conflict with myself. Oh yeah, this inner conflict that I started to have with myself. See, here's what happens, right? I just want to make this clear. So there's a dividing line. There's who I am internally, right? I don't care about, money, wealth, status. I just care about having a good life, having a good experience, being who I am internally, so on and so forth. And then you have the other side over here that's concerned about obtaining wealth, obtaining status, being showered with material stuff, right? Upon learning and sort of gaining that sense of differentiating between the two, I started to divert more towards the inner being. I've never experienced this before, and I wanted to truly understand who I am. And as a result, well, things weren't good. They weren't good. My relationships were drying up. I wasn't really seeing a lot of people. I wasn't going out as often. I was isolating myself more and more, kind of keeping away from people, and again, just not really being a part of society. This was a phase that I went through for a couple months. It was a lengthy sort of process. And, my bank account starts draining. It was interesting, but I didn't care. It's like I didn't want to associate with my ego anymore. And this was both a really great growing experience, but it was also destructive at the same time. I reasoned with myself that I wanted nothing to do with this world. I don't want anything to do with it. I don't want material things. If there was a way that I could meditate so intensively for a period of time and, I don't know, like evaporate into the ether, meditate into heaven or have like a supernatural experience of some sort, whatever it was, I was willing to do that. And of course, that didn't happen. It didn't happen. And I slowly started to come to a realization that this was not I can't speak. This was not a sustainable lifestyle. I'm losing money. My business is suffering. People are wondering how I'm doing. And it just wasn't good. And interestingly, I decided to try something. I said, you know what? Let me see if I can work with the ego and not be devoured by the ego. And what do I mean by being devoured by the ego? Well, basically, we all know people that are very materialistic. They like clothes and houses and cars, and well, that's fine. They can do that. But ultimately, we can see that and observe that ultimately that doesn't lead to happiness, right? It leads to pleasure, which people mistaken for happiness. I was aware of that. I learned that. But I also, came to the realization again that, well, it's good to not be overtaken by the ego. You don't want to totally ignore the ego in of itself, because you need the ego to survive. While we're here, right? It doesn't matter whether there is a heaven or a hell. It doesn't matter if there is a source, right? Ultimately, what really matters right here, right now, concerning our ego, is that our ego allows us to survive. Our ego says, hey man, I need food. Hey man, I need water. Hey dude, I need to get this promotion so I can afford stuff, and the things go on. So I think that it's not necessarily, at least in my opinion, it's not healthy to look at the ego as something absolutely negative. I think that it's actually something that, as long as we know how to keep it in balance, how to keep it in check, and not let it devour us with materialistic things and have it take over our lives to the point where it's ruling us and we're not ruling it, then I think it's good. I think it's like an emotion. A lot of people don't like sadness, or they don't like fear, right? Well, sadness is important because we wouldn't understand fully what happiness is if we never understood what sadness was. And we would never understand what it's like to feel safe if we didn't know what fear was. Does that make sense? It's sort of like you have to know what hot is before you understand what cold is. And in order to understand what cold is, you need to understand what hot is. And this goes into polarity a little bit, which we'll talk about in a future video. But we're just focusing on ego right now. So I hope this makes sense to you guys. I hope you got a lot of value out of it. If you did, please don't forget to leave a like, leave a comment on anything that you've learned, and I will see you next time, guys. Again, thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. And in my native tongue, I say, ha home.